Today I wanted to walk you through how to change all 4 strings on the viola or the violin. It'll be the same method on both instruments. In terms of how frequently to change your strings, I often tell my students to do it once a year, but it's sort of up to you and what your budget allows. Some people change their strings every month, some do it every year, some wait longer. So you can base that on what works for you and how much you're playing. You'll also notice strings wearing. They might start to unravel up here in particular, or you might hear in the sound that they're not staying as in tune, and that's an indicator that it's time to change them. In terms of string brands, I won't go into that in this video, but there's lots of information about that out there, and maybe in the future I'll make a video about that. So today I'm changing my viola strings. It's been way too long for me personally since I've changed them, so I wanted to do that with you here. One word of wisdom before I even start is I'm going to check to make sure my instrument is in tune, so that the tension on the strings is intact before I remove them to change them. So I just tuned a moment ago, but if I hadn't, just with my tuning app, I'll just check, sounds like, each of the strings to make sure they're at the right tension. One big piece of advice for you that I learned when I first changed my strings and actually learned the hard way is only remove one string at a time. If you remove all of them, your bridge will likely fall and possibly your sound post deep in here, which is much harder to set back up. So remove one at a time, and while you're removing that string, maintain the tension on the other strings, and I'll show you as I do that. On both the violin and viola, I would start with the middle or the second highest string first. I wouldn't do the exterior strings or more than one at once. So I'm going to start by removing my D string on my viola. On the violin, it would be my A string. So what I'll do first is I'll just look at my instrument. I'm going to look up at the peg box, and to unwind it, I'll turn it towards me. So I'm going to start turning it towards me kind of slowly. And as I'm doing that, you can see that it's loosening in the peg box. It'll gradually just kind of come out on its own, but as it's loosening, I'll pull it a little bit like this, pulling it out as I continue to twist. Okay, and then once it's out there, I'll look down at the tailpiece, and for me, I only have a fine tuner on the A string, so for me in the tailpiece, I have these holes, so I'm going to pull that end of the string out of the D string hole. And sometimes you have to kind of maneuver the ball out. So I have that D out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my new D. So I'll put my old D over here so I don't get confused. Take my new D out of its package. And I'm using Eva Perazzi gold strings, by the way, which I found work well on this instrument. But again, very personal preference. You'll learn more about what strings work for you and your instrument the more that you try. So I'll take the D string out of the package. What I'm going to start by doing is I take this end, the colored end with the yarn, and I stick it into the peg box in the hole for that peg. Before I do that also, I take a pencil and I mark on the bridge the groove here and also up here. And the reason for that is to keep the string from slipping so that as I put the new one on, it'll stay in place. The other thing I'm going to do before I put that new string on is I'll take my cloth and I'll just wipe off underneath where the old string was. It's a good opportunity to clean there because when the string is on, you can't often get underneath. Some people will go an extra step with their peg, and if they feel like their peg is sticking a lot, they might put some peg compound on there to keep it from, so that you can turn it easily. I don't have that problem so much with mine, so I'm not going to do that, but that's something that you could do if you find that it sticks a lot. So now that I'm ready, I'll clean up down here too, to put my D string on. In each peg there is a little hole, which you can possibly see here. It's a bit hard to see without much light. If you needed, you could have a flashlight or a reading light directed there, but I can see it okay from this angle. So I'm going to take the end of the D string and stick it in there. And I'll try to show you here. You can kind of see where it goes into that hole. Then, as I'm turning, I'm looking to make sure it's staying in, and I'm going to overlap over where that string was one time before I pull it to the right. So I'll show you how that first step looks. I just went over the end of the string once and then started pulling to the right. As I am turning the peg, I'm keeping tension on the string so it doesn't fly out. And as I'm turning the peg, I'm also pushing it in this way so that it stays in place. So as I push it in, this is gliding through, which perhaps you can see as that happens. So now the length is shortening, which means I'm starting to think about the other end going into the tailpiece. I'm watching that it lines up with the groove I made. So here it is at this stage. And you'll notice in my peg box that each string, so the D string and the A string, are going to the right with the yarn, and the G and the C are going to the left. And that's so that my strings don't overlap in the peg box. That's often an issue that happens with people, is that they might cross their strings. When that happens, the strings will not stay tight with the peg, and also they will wear out faster. So it's just best to avoid it. You want to have an image that looks kind of like that in the peg box, so they all have their own place to line up. So now as I'm keeping tension, I'm looking down at the tailpiece to see if I'm ready to put it in the tailpiece. I mean, not quite yet. One more turn. Now I'm going to take the end of the D string with that ball, and actually I made it too tight, and I'll put it in to the tailpiece. So you'll see in my tailpiece I have those little grooves, and the ball end of the string goes in there. Sometimes that can be hard to get in, for my tailpiece at least, so I'm going to loosen it a little bit more, the D string, and then I'm actually going to physically kind of direct it in to make sure that the ball is in the right spot as I start to tighten it more. So now that's into the tailpiece, and then I'll start to tighten it again. The whole time I'm keeping tension on the string up by the peg box, tightening, watching to make sure that the string lines up with this groove on the bridge, looking to make sure it's still in the tailpiece, tightening. And as I tighten, I'm going to start to feel like I can release my finger from here because it's tight enough. So I'm going to pull that finger out, go back down a little bit, then up. One little piece of advice with this is you don't want to go too hard too fast with your turn on the peg. That can easily cause the string to fly out or even to snap. So you want to do every motion gradually as you're changing your string. I'm looking just to make sure it's still in the tailpiece so it hasn't come out at all, the ball end. Tighten a little bit more. Now I'm going to get my tuner app again, and I'm going to check and see the other strings. So the A actually is a little high, so I'm going to go back down a bit. The D, of course, is still really low, so I'm going to come towards me with the peg, then back up a little, back down, back up, down, gradually inching my way towards the goal of the D. I'm getting closer now. Back down. Out a little above C. So with each of these turns, I'm not doing too much one way again because I could break the string or it could pop out. As I'm doing it, I'm making sure my string is staying in that bridge groove and in the groove up at the nut up here. I'm also looking to make sure I wound it properly in the peg box so that it's not too much towards this way, because if I put too much yarn too close to the edge, that will also make it hard to turn when I'm tuning. Okay, I'm getting there. I'll go back down a little bit. And now I'm at a D. When you put new strings on, you will quickly learn that they don't stay in your destination for long. They will go flat as you're putting them on. So over the next few days after you've put them on, depending on how much you play, how much you tune, you'll have to retune more often than you will after they've settled in. It's just part of changing your strings. So now that D is kind of in tune, a little low again, I'm going to check the other strings. Okay, G is still okay, and then C, still okay. Now, here's a crucial thing that often we forget to talk about, which is that as we're putting new strings on, after each string is on, check your bridge. So I'm going to look at the alignment of my bridge. Make sure that it hasn't shifted too far one way or the other. To me, mine still looks pretty good. It looks like it's decently straight. And then I'll look at it this way to make sure it seems centered with the fingerboard. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to tune my D again because it's already gone flat. Alright, so now I have my old D string over here. Instead of just throwing it away, even though this string is really old, I'm going to actually put that old string in my new envelope that I just took the new D out of. If I can find that envelope, here it is. And I'm going to have that as a backup in case all of a sudden these new strings pop and I need to just put on an old string, or if I don't have a new set. So I'll just put this in this envelope, and then once I'm done changing all of them, I'll mark the date that I did this on so that I can keep track of how old these new ones are. So now I've done D. It's low again. Okay, so what I'll do next is I'll do my G string. So I'm going to go through the same process, which means I'm looking at my G. I'm going to start by turning the peg towards me. So you can see as I turn it, the G loosens. I'm going to put my finger there to help pull it out. Not aggressively, but just kind of guide it. It's coming out. Now I'm going to look at it to see how close I am. Okay, I'm getting there. And this is a good view, actually. You can kind of see the end of the string in the peg, which will help you when you put it in. You'll see what you're aiming for. I'll pull G out more. Still pulling it. Okay, so it's out of the peg box. I'm going to look down at the tailpiece, get the ball, and then it just fell right out. Great. So I'll put the old G over here near my old D. I'm going to take my new G out of the packet. Exciting new strings. Always fun. Okay, so here's my new G. Before I put it on, I'm going to do the same thing I did with D, which is that I'm going to wipe off the fingerboard. Mark a groove here at the nut, and then here on the bridge. If I can see it, there it is. Just a little bit to help keep it in place. Now I'll take my new G, and I'll start like how I did with the D, which is that I'm going to start with the yarn end, find that hole in the peg, and remember for G, I'm going to wind it to the left after I cross it over its end of the string initially. So I'll stick it in, and I'll show you how that first looks. So there it is when I first put it in. It's not secure. It would easily fall out if I let go. So it's there, but then when I do my first turn, I'm looking for the end of the string, and I actually maybe made my end too long, so I'm going to pull it out a little bit. Okay? Okay, just the end, and then I'm going to cover it one time with a turn so that it holds in place, and you can see how that one turn looks. Now as I continue to turn, I'm going to pull it to the left, so again it doesn't overlap with the strings that are on the right. So I'm pulling it to the left as I push my peg in so it stays in place, holding the string tight so it doesn't fly out. Now I'll take the ball end and I'm going to start to stick it in the tailpiece. So down here I'm looking for that hole. I'm going to guide it with my other hand too because it's tight enough up there to make sure that it truly goes in, since I have kind of a narrow place for the end of the string. Now I still have tension on the string, and luckily it hasn't flown out of the peg. So as I keep tension, I'm going to turn up here, watching to make sure it stays in its place. So it's landing the right spot on the bridge, the right spot on the nut. I'm going to release this finger, tighten. So there's how it looks with the new G and D. You can see I have my G to the left, my D to the right if I'm facing the instrument. And then I'm going to go back and see where the other strings are in terms of pitch. So A, my tuner, a little bit flat, I'll make it a little higher. I bet D is low, of course, because it's new. Yeah, so D I'm going to make a bit higher again. Okay, and then we've got C. Still okay. So G, of course, is super low because I just put it on. So I'm going to do that gradual turning thing I did with D. So I'll go up a bit while I'm keeping tension this way with the peg. Go back down, up more. Okay, I'm getting there. Back down a bit. Up more again. Down. Up again. Down again. Up. I'm almost at a G now. I'm looking to make sure it's still in the groove. Checking my bridge. The bridge is looking okay. The ball is still in the tailpiece. Okay. Great. great, I made it to G. So of course I'm gonna have to retune it, but at least for now the tension is good. Check my other strings again. D is already a little flat. G. Okay, great. So now I'm going to go to my C string, my furthest over string. For violin it'd be your G. And you can see the C kind of hangs out lower. It's underneath. So you don't have to worry about it overlapping G as long as you get it over the end of the string and then pull it this way like we did with G. So I'm going to release C, check my bridge again. I think it still looks pretty good. So I'll release C just like I did with the other strings. Oh, and actually before I do that, I'm going to put my old G back in the new G envelope as my backup set. Unless, of course, you have another backup set or you're sure this set is totally done, I would do this just in an emergency in case a string breaks and you don't have any other option. So there's my old G. Now I'll take off my old C. Turn it towards me again. You'll see it loosen. It's the thickest string, so maybe the easiest to see. I'll pull it gradually as I'm loosening. I'm turning it that way. Pulling it. I'm going to look now to make sure I direct it. Great. So that end is out, and then I'll look down here. On my viola, the C in the tailpiece, it's a little tricky to get in here because it's the same width and it's thicker, so I have a little trouble getting it in there, but came out easily. So here's my old C over here. I'm going to wipe off the fingerboard before I even get out the new C. Okay, I'll do that groove. So I'll do the bridge groove with my pencil. I'll do this, the nut groove. Okay, I'm going to get out my new C string now.